After years of simmering tensions, Pakistan has taken a dramatic and unprecedented step. It has launched a full-scale war against the Afghan Taliban. This eruption of conflict is pushing the region toward chaos, at a moment when the world is already grappling with turmoil, from the bombings in Ukraine and ongoing strife involving Russia and Iran, to military clashes across U.S. bases scattered throughout the Middle East. Now this volatile region stands on the edge of a dangerous new crisis, as two formidable powers clash openly. The latest and perhaps most alarming escalation between Pakistan and Taliban-controlled Afghanistan has unfolded through a series of border skirmishes that have spiraled into open warfare. Pakistan's Defense Minister, Kawawai Mohammad Aif, has publicly declared that his country is prepared to wage war against the Taliban, claiming that Pakistan has run out of patience. But how did we arrive at this combustible moment? What has triggered this war now? And crucially, what consequences will it have for Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the broader region? Throughout this exploration, we'll unpack the answers to those pressing questions, so stay tuned as the story unfolds. The catalyst for the current conflict can be traced back to the night of February 26. On that evening, the Taliban's military wing launched a coordinated series of attacks on Pakistani positions scattered along the Durand Line, the contentious border stretching approximately 1,600 miles through rugged mountains and arid deserts, separating Pakistan from Afghanistan. This border, long disputed and volatile, has historically been a flashpoint for hostilities between these two neighbors, and it has once again become the focal ground for confrontation. Reports from the BBC reveal that the Taliban offensive began at around 8:00 p.m. local time and targeted border provinces such as Kunar, Logman, Nuristan, Paktia, and Paktika. Many of these areas house Pakistani military bases, making them critical strategic locations. The Taliban justified these cross-border raids by citing Pakistan's earlier airstrikes on February 22nd, which targeted militant camps inside Afghan territory. And at the time, CNN described Pakistan's actions as a serious strain on the tenuous peace between the two nations. However, the Taliban's response on February 26 indicated a breakdown of that fragile equilibrium. Following the Taliban's border raids, Pakistan reacted swiftly and forcefully. Pakistan asserted that the Taliban had grossly miscalculated by launching unprovoked assaults on multiple locations within the Pakistani province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, situated in the country's northwest. In retaliation, during the early morning hours of February 27th, Pakistan conducted an extensive bombing campaign against Taliban positions inside Afghanistan, not only striking several border provinces, but also targeting areas within Kabul itself. CNN has reported that Pakistan's strikes on Kabul possibly had a specific aim, targeting Hibatullah Akhundzada, the secretive and enigmatic leader of the Taliban, who hails from the Afghan capital. Whether these attacks were deliberately designed to eliminate Akhundzada or were primarily symbolic demonstrations of force remains unclear. However, the name Pakistan gave to its Operation Righteous Fury, strongly suggests a deliberate, forceful intent. If Pakistan's objective was indeed to take out the Taliban's leader, it marks a serious escalation in both the conflict's scale and intensity. No confirmation has emerged regarding the success of these actions. The Taliban, for their part, would never acknowledge the death of their leader, even if such an event had occurred. Following Pakistan's counterattacks, the Taliban spokesman, Zabihullah Mujahid, posted on X a message that has since been deleted, claiming that the Taliban retaliated with strikes on military positions in Helmand and Kandahar provinces. Yet, the accuracy of this claim remains ambiguous, especially since the post was removed shortly after it appeared. Additionally, Pakistan reports that Taliban drones have attacked 3 locations since hostilities escalated. 2 of these were military targets, a military academy in Abbottabad, and an artillery school in Nowshera. Disturbingly, one Taliban drone reportedly malfunctioned and crashed near a primary school in Swabi, with the indication that the intended target was the school itself. If true, this implies a direct targeting of civilians, marking an unprecedented shift in Taliban tactics. Historically, the Taliban were known only to possess civilian drones, making their use of drones for military purposes a novel and significant development. At present, the situation has evolved into a series of tit-for-tat exchanges between the two sides. Casualty numbers are rising, although the true scale of losses remains difficult to verify. CNN reports that as of February 27th, the Taliban claimed Pakistan strikes had resulted in 19 civilian deaths and 26 injuries, predominantly among women and children. However, this data may be leveraged by the Taliban for propaganda. Each faction also provides conflicting figures regarding their combatant casualties. The Taliban assert that 55 Pakistani soldiers have died in their attacks, and that 19 Pakistani posts have been captured. They also claim relatively low fatalities on their side, 8 killed and 11 wounded during these operations. In stark contrast, Pakistan's Prime Minister's spokesperson, Musharraf Zaidi, reports that 297 Taliban fighters have been killed, with over 450 injured as of February 27th. The truth remains elusive amid such starkly divergent accounts. Many media outlets qualifying their reports with disclaimers emphasize that they have been unable to independently verify casualty numbers released by either Pakistan or the Taliban. Despite this ambiguity, one fact stands clear. The confrontation has been brutal. The spark for the conflict is disputed. The Pakistani cites an attack on Taliban bases inside Afghanistan as the trigger, whereas the Taliban assert they were responding to attacks along the border shared with Pakistan. Either way, roughly a week of intense fighting has unfolded with no sign of abatement. As reported by CNN, Pakistan and Afghanistan have a history of such volatile clashes. Since October, the two countries have been under a fragile ceasefire agreement, put into place after previous deadly conflicts. However, the current events indicate that this uneasy peace remains precarious at best. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, known as CSIS, observes that the conflict this past October was largely concentrated along the border regions between Afghanistan and Pakistan. However, the strikes that took place towards the end of February, particularly those launched by Pakistan, seem to have expanded beyond these border areas. Essentially, what began as a fierce but localized border dispute has now escalated into what Pakistan is openly calling a war. Naturally, the pressing question is, why has this happened? We've discussed one of the initial triggers behind this conflict. The Taliban government in Afghanistan believes that Pakistan breached a ceasefire agreement by launching strikes against what Pakistan claims were militant bases located within Afghan territory. Pakistan, on the other hand, insists those bases were actually occupied by terrorists conducting operations inside Pakistan itself. This brings us to one of the core reasons behind the escalating tensions. Pakistan accuses Afghanistan of providing sanctuary to terrorists responsible for wreaking havoc within Pakistan for years. According to Pakistani leadership, the Taliban government is supporting anti-Pakistani terrorist groups that have been carrying out a relentless wave of suicide bombings and attacks across the country. Conversely, the Taliban strongly denies these allegations, asserting that Afghan territory is not being used as a launchpad for threats against any nation. They contend that Pakistan's military is essentially engaging in unprovoked assaults, targeting Afghan civilians. This creates a classic cycle of accusation and counter-accusation, with neither side willing to back down. However, one point is clear. Pakistan is indeed facing significant terrorism challenges within its borders. The exact extent to which the Taliban directly orchestrates these actions, or whether they are carried out by independent factions or sects sympathetic to the Taliban, is less clear. Over the past several years, Pakistan has witnessed a steady rise in terrorist incidents. According to data from the U.S. Department of State, terrorist attacks in Pakistan and the resulting casualties increased by 50% compared to figures from 2022. These attacks have been carried out by a variety of groups, including local branches of ISIS, the Balochistan Liberation Army, and notably the Taliban Pakistan, or TTP. This last group, the TTP, is particularly important and will be discussed further. Looking ahead, the South Asia Terrorism Portal, SATP, in collaboration with the Institute for Conflict Management, ranked Pakistan second globally in its terrorism index for 2025. The number of deaths from terrorist attacks in Pakistan rose to 1,081 over the year leading up to this ranking, a 45% increase from the previous year. Strikingly, the TTP was responsible for about half of these attacks, causing 558 deaths in 2024 alone. These sharp rises in terrorism underscore the severe security challenges Pakistan faces and illustrate why the Pakistani government views its military actions in Afghanistan as a necessary response. Let's delve deeper into the complexity of the tensions. The recent surge in militant activity on Pakistani soil is largely traced back to Afghanistan and its Taliban administration. Despite the Taliban's denials, authoritative sources like the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIs, reveal that under Taliban governance, Afghanistan has increasingly become a sanctuary for terrorist groups such as the Taliban Pakistan. TTP and Al-Qaeda. Notably, there's been a marked rise in violence across Pakistan since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan in 2021, coinciding with the withdrawal of U.S. forces from the region. This timeline adds weight to Pakistan's concerns about terrorism emanating from across its border. However, terrorism is just one part of the story. Pakistan's grievances extend beyond security threats, touching on deeply rooted geopolitical and historical disputes that complicate relations between the two neighbors, disputes that have now escalated into open conflict. Before revealing the most astonishing reason behind Pakistan's declaration of war against Afghanistan and the Taliban, let's pause for a moment. You're watching The Military Show, your source for comprehensive and nuanced military and geopolitical insights, not just sound bites. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update that keeps you ahead of the curve. Wow. Returning to the border dispute, the contentious Durand Line remains the physical and symbolic fault line along which most of the fighting has unfolded. This sprawling border stretches between Pakistan and Afghanistan and carries a fraught legacy. Successive Afghan governments, including the current Taliban leadership, have long refused to acknowledge this boundary, rooted in how it came to be. This is reports that the Durand Line was drawn back in 1893 by British colonial authorities as a strategic buffer to protect the British Raj from imperial expansion by Russia. But in doing so, the British overlooked the demographic reality. The Pashtun communities straddling this artificial border were split, creating significant cultural and social disruption. This detail matters profoundly since the Taliban is primarily a Pashtun movement, which largely explains their persistent disputes and conflicts occurring along the Durand Line. In hindsight, Pakistan has had opportunities to address and perhaps diffuse this border tension diplomatically. The Royal and United Services Institute, RUSI, even suggests Pakistan's failure to engage constructively on this issue may represent a significant diplomatic blunder, especially when considering that the Durand Line was imposed by a colonial power long absent from the region, nearly a century ago. This reluctance to resolve the border conflict has, as Rusi puts it, resulted in Pakistan unintentionally nurturing a Frankensteinian monster, the Taliban itself. A group that Pakistan once supported now poses substantial security challenges, and this is tightly interwoven with Islamabad's ongoing inability or unwillingness to resolve the Durand Line issue. Of course, Pakistan would defend its stance, arguing that a border established over 100 years ago deserves recognition and respect, even if it divides Pashtun communities that form the backbone of the Taliban. This reality underscores how historical and regional disputes often escalate, evolving far beyond their original scope. With this context in place, we return to what may be the most astonishing and unexpected reason for Pakistan's declaration of war and its persistent clashes with the Taliban: the role of India. Specifically, as CS highlights, Pakistan accused the Taliban of being closely aligned with Indian interests, fueling suspicion and hostility that only intensify the conflict. Pakistan has recently accused Afghanistan of essentially becoming a proxy for India. This accusation stems from the fact that India has provided humanitarian aid to Afghanistan during the Taliban's rule and has maintained diplomatic contacts within the country. However, this claim overlooks some critical historical context. India has, for a long time, supported groups that have actively resisted the Taliban, such as the Northern Alliance, and has aligned itself with the United States in this regard. Despite this, some voices in Pakistan now push the narrative that Afghanistan has effectively turned into a colony of India. One notable example is Qaif, the Pakistani defense minister mentioned earlier. He took to social media platform X following a series of Taliban bombings inside Pakistan to make some strong assertions. He argued that the expectation was for peace to take hold in Afghanistan after the Taliban assumed control and the US withdrew. Instead, the Taliban regime transformed the country into a client state dominated by India. According to Qaif, Pakistan exerted every effort, directly and through allied nations, to maintain stability during this period. This included significant diplomatic initiatives. Yet, the Taliban allegedly became a proxy force for India, as he declared. This viewpoint is highly debatable, especially considering that India has maintained basic diplomatic ties with Afghanistan for a far longer period than the Taliban's current rule. There are perspectives suggesting that Pakistan may be leveraging its conflict with the Taliban to undermine a critical regional and geopolitical rival. Having discussed the underlying causes of the conflict between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban, the question now turns to what lies ahead. This stage presents some complexities. On February 28th, Pakistan announced that it would refuse any dialogue with the Taliban-led government in Afghanistan in response to the recent week's developments, implying that the ongoing skirmishes and strikes could be only the initial phase of a more extensive conflict. On paper, should such a war escalate, Pakistan would be the stronger military force. This assessment comes from sources like CNN and Global Firepower, the latter of which ranks military capabilities annually based on numerous criteria. According to Global Firepower, Pakistan holds advantages across nearly all categories. It boasts approximately 660,000 active military personnel. Comparatively, the Afghan Taliban's forces range between 75,000 and 170,000 active members, depending on sources. Pakistan also maintains 550,000 reserve forces, while the Taliban have none. Additionally, Pakistan fields about 500,000 paramilitary forces in contrast to Afghanistan's 90,000. The difference in defense budgets is even more striking. Pakistan allocates over $9 billion annually, whereas Afghanistan's military spending is roughly $145 million. The Taliban's military assets are limited. They possess virtually no air force and limited land power beyond roughly 4,000 armored vehicles. In stark contrast, Pakistan commands over 59,000 armored vehicles, more than 2,677 tanks, and thousands of artillery units. Afghanistan's landlocked status denies it a navy, while Pakistan has a fleet of 120 naval assets, enabling potential offshore strikes against Taliban targets. CNN adds that the Taliban's existing hardware largely consists of aging Soviet-era helicopters and limited other equipment. All of these factors together highlight the significant imbalance in military strength between the two sides, which may influence the trajectory of emerging conflicts between Pakistan and the Taliban regime. Let's consider the complex military and geopolitical situation involving Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban. Pakistan, as we know, possesses a significant nuclear arsenal, estimated at around 170 nuclear weapons, according to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. While it is highly unlikely that Pakistan would ever deploy such weapons against the Taliban, this impressive stockpile adds to the overall formidable arsenal available to the Pakistani military. On paper, with such vast military power, one might expect Pat to easily outmatch any opponent. Yet, the reality on the ground suggests that a clear-cut, effortless victory is far from guaranteed, especially if a ceasefire is not negotiated. One critical factor complicating this picture is the presence of the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP. We mentioned this group earlier, and it's worth revisiting. The TTP operates within Pakistan itself, and is known as a terrorist organization that Pakistan frequently accuses the Afghan Taliban of providing sanctuary to. This is a claim that has a basis in logic after all. The T in TTP stands for Taliban. Moreover, although the Taliban has previously acted as a mediator between Pakistan and the TTP, insights from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSAs, revealed that the Taliban tends to align more frequently with the TTP's interests than with Pakistan's government. Why does the TTP matter so much? It embodies exactly the kind of threat that could neutralize Pakistan's overwhelming conventional military superiority: guerrilla warfare. The Taliban's history in Afghanistan is marked by its mastery of guerrilla tactics, which made it such a formidable adversary for the U.S. forces and their allies. As the U.S. eventually withdrew from Afghanistan, allowing a Taliban resurgence, it became clear that the Taliban excels at inflicting significant damage on better equipped foes by employing asymmetrical warfare strategies. The TTP, believed to comprise between 30,000 and 35,000 members, according to United Nations estimates, is a significant force. While not large enough to challenge Pakistan's military in a classic conventional war, they are more than capable of sustaining an intensive guerrilla campaign within Pakistan's borders. This means Pakistan could face heightened terrorist activities such as suicide bombings, ambush attacks, and general sabotage directed at its military installations, orchestrated by the TTP with implicit or explicit support from the Afghan Taliban. This internal threat could erode Pakistan's strength over time, making any conflict not merely external but deeply intertwined with internal security challenges. As hostilities continue, the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, highlights that any conflict between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban is expected to be anything but conventional warfare. Pakistan has already begun striking Afghan government facilities, signaling an escalation. Yet, the extensive guerrilla warfare experience inherent in the Taliban cadre that now control Afghanistan's government could prove decisive in sustaining protracted conflict. Instead of seeking to annihilate Pakistan's military, the Taliban strategy would likely mirror its fight against the U.S. to fragment into numerous small cells scattered throughout the country, relentlessly weakening and destabilizing Pakistan from within. Coupled with TTP's activities inside Pakistan, This would make any militarily claimed victory costly and prolonged, with continuous unrest likely to persist for many years. Furthermore, Pakistan faces another crucial hurdle: its fragile economy. According to Pramit Palri, a South Asia analyst at the Eurasia Group, Pakistan simply cannot afford a war with the Taliban. The country's economy is already in a precarious position, and the financial burden of sustained conflict would only exacerbate its economic fragility. Thus, despite its substantial military capabilities, Pakistan's path forward is shadowed by both domestic insurgencies and economic strain, making the prospect of a swift, clean military success against the Taliban and associated groups highly doubtful. A similar conventional force might be feasible for Pakistan, considering the size and power of its military. However, engaging in combat against what Chowdhury describes as essentially a coalition of militias would be an expensive and prolonged endeavor, one that Pakistan is unlikely to sustain over the long term. In essence, neither party holds the capacity to decisively defeat the other. This stalemate, it seems, benefits the Taliban far more than it does Pakistan. This delicate balance may explain why other leaders in South Asia are already urging an end to the violence. When the most recent hostilities erupted, Iran offered to mediate between the conflicting sides. Yet with recent developments, specifically the United States and Israel, launching their own campaign against Iran's regime, which resulted in the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, the feasibility of Iran's mediation now remains uncertain. The call for de-escalation has also come from the United Nations, China, the United Kingdom, and even Mujahid, the Taliban spokesperson. On February 27th, Mujahid expressed a desire to resolve the conflict through dialogue. Despite these appeals, Pakistan has, so far, rejected dialogue as an option. This refusal leaves the situation in South Asia precariously balanced on a knife's edge. If Pakistan truly has run out of patience, what we are witnessing might just be the calm before a massive storm, one potent enough to engulf the entire South Asian continent in war. Should such a conflict erupt, the specter of World War II would not be far behind, given the vast number of nations with vested interests in that region. Notably, the long-standing conflict between India and Pakistan, which could potentially ignite if Pakistan's claims that the Afghan Taliban serves as a proxy for India are valid, is identified as one of 5 potential flashpoints that might trigger World War II in 2026. To learn more about this and the other 4 critical flashpoints, be sure to check out our dedicated video. If you found value in this analysis, don't forget to subscribe for ongoing coverage of the latest developments in global warfare. As always, we thank you sincerely for watching.